Welcome in, everybody, to the Flagship podcast interview. We are previewing Texas, West Virginia in a titanic showdown of 2, 4, and 6 teams, 2 and 5 in the Big 12. And we're doing it with Mike Casaza of earsports.com on the 24/7 Sports Network. Mike, how are you doing?
Doing great. Titanic in the sense that we can see this coming and we wish we could avoid it.
Right. The iceberg is in sight.
Yeah.
Um,
I did not foresee this one coming. I thought even like earlier in this season, I thought Texas would be kind of exciting. And even when West Virginia was trying to put the pieces together, really good defense and an offense that I think could probably do some things against the Texas defense. But I kind of wondered, early for Sarkisian and Brown is always kind of better at the end, always, but his first 2 seasons he was. I kind of had this one circled because it's a big game. It could have a lot in the line for just like the coaches at their stages. I did not think it would be one's in a bowl game and one's not. Very surprising to me.
I agree. I had higher expectations for both of these teams. I like Neil Brown. I liked what he had going last year with that defense. And Mike, even as as we look back, I'm looking at the start of the season for West Virginia. They beat Virginia Tech, who has now fired their coach, by the way. Barely lost at OU 16-13. In maybe a little bit of a foreshadowing of some things that OU had to work out. Obviously, at quarterback, they've gotten a lot better since Caleb Williams came in, although OU just lost to Baylor. And then the loss to Tech, that one surprised me. What happened in that game?
Kind of indicative of, I would say, like pattern behavior for them, but there are times, especially this season, but during their first 3 seasons, where they just didn't get it going until it was too late. And I think when you look at the first couple of years, they just didn't have the horses the first year to make that happen. And listen, if you're outmanned, you're going to fall behind sometimes. But last season and definitely this season, the roster's in better shape, but they just sometimes just don't appear for the first 15 minutes or so. And that happened again last week. They were down 17-0 in a hurry to Oklahoma or Kansas State. Oklahoma State the week before. Listen, Oklahoma State's doing that to everybody right now, but you can go through different games and just slow starts. And I mean, 17-0 against Texas Tech, who fires their coach just a couple weeks later. I think that was one thing that maybe you said, okay, this is not progressing at the pace or the quality that you want, because that game shouldn't happen at home. And I say that because that's the team that they're 0-3 against. So Neil Brown will have an 0-3 record against Matt Wells until Matt Wells gets a job and gets a spot on the sideline across from Neil Brown again. That doesn't make sense. I'm not sure that they've had the worst roster either 3 times, but they played the worst game. The first year, that was Matt Wells' first year too. So whatever things you can say about not having it that day, and that was a lot to a little in the first half in that game. Whatever you could say about, oh, Neil Brown's at a disadvantage, Matt Wells had the same disadvantage. Last year, played a better game against them, but a fumble late in the game gets returned. But that was a team that they're 0-2 against, and you're saying, man, this feels like this team should be better than 0-2 against Texas Tech if things are happening like they profess. And then when you come out and you get a turnover on your first possession, like you create a turnover, you do nothing with it, and you give up back-to-back touchdowns, 17-0. They had some goofy clock management. Quarterback just missed a wide-open receiver on a touchdown pass that could have won the game. And yet they lose on a 50-50 ball and a field goal at the end, and it's a 3-point game, and you're just sitting there going, is this team good or not? And what's the margin, and why does this team keep creating it? And that's kind of the thing that stands in the way of productive, positive conversations. They can have bad starts, and they create margins they can't afford to create.
Well, and then as you mentioned, I mean, kind of the up and down nature, they go to TCU and they win by double digits. And then they come home and they beat Iowa State 38-31. Jared Daigie's slinging it all over the place. Tell us about those 2 games, what you saw from West Virginia in the win on the road at TCU and then coming home and beating Iowa State.
Yeah, TCU was after an open week, and for whatever reason, for a team that hadn't won on the road in almost 2 years, I really felt like that was a good spot for the team and the program, because you get an open week to take a deep breath and to reassess things. They hadn't had a chance to do that. And then you're playing on the road where you've won before. That was their prior road win, again, almost 2 years earlier. but you've beaten them before. You're 2-0 against them. You kind of sense that TCU is starting to show signs, and you play well enough, and you do some good things on offense. But they also made some changes too, and they're not going to talk about it. They go out of their way, but Neil Brown stepped away as like the play caller. He still does a lot on offense, but he's not signaling the plays anymore. That's kind of designed by a committee, a faction, whatever you want to call it, during the week. Jared Parker is the offensive coordinator. Kirk Shiraka is an analyst that they brought in from Penn State, and he's known around from Western Michigan to Minnesota before that too, where he's done some good things with offenses, and Brown really values his opinion. He's done him since back in their what would that be, the CAA days when they were at Delaware. So familiarity there helped, and that got them new ideas and new results, and that worked. And then I can't explain what happened to Iowa State. I don't. You saw Iowa State's defense; it's good, and again, Texas's offense is good, and I just think that there's a way to do things against Iowa State's defense if you can be patient and you can just kind of understand those three safeties aren't going to let anything get past them, and you just take stuff underneath. They hit a ton of outs. They hit short stuff. They used the tight end, and they just took what was there, and it kept working and working. And they were chunking up yards and getting points, and it was a really good day. That's not what can happen against Oklahoma State. Their secondary is really aggressive. Their defensive line just whipped West Virginia. I just think the scheme lined up perfectly for Iowa State's personnel. They were missing their middle linebacker, Mike Rose, that day. That was a big difference. But West Virginia was able to do things, and Daggy played great. Like he's making like right hash to left sideline throws on the out that he just habitually struggles with. And you're thinking, hey, great day. This is going to turn the page. And that just hasn't happened. But it's one of those outlier performances. On paper, it doesn't look like it belongs because it doesn't. That hasn't been their pattern. But they had a great plan and a great day that day. You can't take that from them.
Yeah, and it looked like things were headed in the right direction. As you said, Oklahoma State, to me, the best team in the Big 12, has played that way. Their defense is, been a monster, and Jalen Warren is as tough as they get at the running back position. And then, as you mentioned, the loss to K-State, a team that they had owned. I mean, 5-game winning streak against K-State going into last week's game, and Deuce Vaughn, what where did that one get away?
Well, they turned it over on the second play from scrimmage, which is what, a team that's prone to step on the rake is going to do. It was just a simple slant right in the middle. They're good at that stuff. They have underneath receivers who get open. They got a big outside receiver who gets open. They run the slant very well. The pass hit him in the face mask, and he was so open, Chip, that the defensive back was like 5 yards away and had plenty of room to catch it and make a return. That shouldn't happen, right? Second play from scrimmage, quick change. Their defense hasn't been good at that this year. They should have experience. They've got about a dozen turnovers. So come right down the field and they just get run over. And you're thinking this is going to be bad. One team came to play, one team didn't. It's apparent who's who. They punt it. They switch field positions. West Virginia gets an interception. They bring the ball inside the 14, but they have a linebacker who's just a violent targeting play, really dirty play. He gets ejected. The interception gets overturned. Flip the field again with a punt. Now West Virginia's playing off its goal line, has a punt blocked, return for a touchdown. And if Kansas State gets a non-offensive touchdown, as most teams, you're not going to win. That's just what the history says. So it's 14-0 at 17-0 at the half. They get back in the game. It's 24-17 because say this about Browns teams, they haven't been great at the start of games. They don't really get blown out very often because they fight and they play and they find a way sometimes. It's 24-17. Skylar Thompson looked very human. It's 4th and 8 at the 39-yard line. And you're thinking, okay, this is interesting. What's Kleiman going to do? They like to go for fourth downs. They're 12 out of 14 now this year. But that's a situation where you might punt it. Maybe you take a delay, punt it. Maybe you line up and try to get in the jump off sides, and 4th and 3, you kick it. Like just a whole bunch of different things go through your head. Last of which is let's throw a seam route to our tight end for a 35-yard gain, which is what happened. They flattened out their coverage. They goofed up West Virginia secondary, just a blown assignment. And he just throws a dart right in the tight end's pocket. It's a 35-yard gain. It's first and goal of the 4. Vaughn walks in. All of a sudden, the 7-point game is a 14-point game. And the compound matters. This isn't a team that makes the best of a good situation. It typically makes a bad situation worse. They hand it off to Letty Brown the next drive, and he fumbles. And all of a sudden, that goes your best chance out the window to win the game. So, again, they create the margins oftentimes. They can eliminate them, but they just find a way of creating the margin again.
Before we get to the playmakers to watch, How good is K-State? Because that's Texas's last opponent.
They are really good at getting in their lane and staying in there too. It's kind of like what West Virginia wants to do, I think. But I wonder sometimes about Vaughn and their backup running back Irvin. And I understand Vaughn's the talent, you got to play him, but he's so good at the stretch plays outside, and that's something that WVU's defense is pretty good against. He ended up mashing him up inside, which is kind of a surprise. But I wonder where the splash plays come from on their offense. They surprise you sometimes. Like, again, a seam route to your tight end. Okay. But can you do that consistently to win a game where, if Texas is playing good offensively, can they score a bunch of points? I'm not sure that the Kansas State defense is great. Gave up a lot of yardage to West Virginia. I think West Virginia had about 400 plus yards. That probably shouldn't happen, right? They play a 3-3-5. They have a really good defensive end who has 11 sacks. He was a non-factor against West Virginia. A really good secondary, long. They can test a lot of stuff. They're going to get their hands on passes, and who knows what happens. But a lot has to go right for them to win games, which is kind of the story of Kansas State for as long as I've known them. I mean, whatever the coach has been, just, play smart, use special teams and defense, get your pocket scores from, surprising areas, and you can do something with it. I just wonder about their offense. I know Thompson's been accurate, but his receivers are pretty normal. Vaughn is like a one-man gang. If you can keep Vaughn inside and stop him from being a weapon in the passing game, their offense comes back down to earth. And I just wonder about how effective, how splashy their defense can be. So if you have offense that day, I certainly have a chance, I think.
All right, we'll take a quick break with Mike Casaza of earsports.com previewing Texas and West Virginia at 11 a.m. on Saturday. We'll be right back. And if you're watching us on the Horns 24/7 YouTube channel, we'll roll on with Mike Casaza. And Mike, we talked about the West Virginia offense when Jarrett Daigie's on and Letty Brown is on, and they've got a talented receiving core. Winston Wright, Bryce Ford Wheaton, Sam James.
Yeah.
What, talk about this West Virginia offense when it's clicking.
Yeah, their offensive line is going to have to protect. When they're good, their five give them time to do something. And if it's rattled a little bit early, Daigie's clock goes off quick. And he sees things that aren't there, and he doesn't see things that are there, and that's a bad status for a quarterback. So it really does begin with their offensive line. Their left tackle is kind of ordinary. He hasn't had a good year. They just don't have anybody to push him. Their best part, left guard, center, right guard, they're good, and they can run inside zone, and they can do some gap stuff in the middle. Their right tackle is a true freshman who was like a top 150 player, like a 4-star guy, and they like him a lot. He's going to be a good player, but he's a true freshman playing defensive end in the Big 12. It's tough. It just begins there, and that's very simple for football. But when they can run the ball, they can move people, and when they can't, they get moved, and that's a big concern for this game, because I know that there have been myriad issues there, but they're so big up front for Texas that's an issue. And like Sweat gave them trouble last year, and like just he's enormous. So if you can occupy that guard, center guard, that really takes away their strength. So that's one thing that their players on offense, or probably their offensive line, because they're that important, but they've been that good, those three guys. They just don't have a lot of playmakers. They don't have like a score any snap kind of guy. I mean, they could hit Winston Wright in a slant and do it, but he's liable to drop it or, dance around and get tackled or just not make something happen with it. Bryce Ford Wheaton had just terrible drop issues his first 2 years. Been better this year. He's made some acrobatic catches, but, he's missed a couple too that have been big plays. They missed Sam James. He was really effective earlier in the season. He'd come around and shaken off a bad 2020 when he was like a 70-catch, 900-yard receiver 2 years ago, and as a redshirt freshman. Very ordinary last year, struggled with drops, really was hard on himself, and was back to it this year, and just gave him an ability to kind of be taller and stretch the field. He's like 6'1" in the slot, and that just hasn't happened lately. And their right side is where they're really hurting right now, too. Their best receiver probably is Isaiah Esdale. He does a ton of stuff for them in the screen game. He has the best hands. They throw fades to him sometimes. He's had, well, they're calling it multiple upper body injuries, but he's gotten hit in the ribs and the shoulders so much going across the middle that he probably isn't going to play. And they had to move a true freshman, Caden Prather, from the left to the right. Watch him. He's really interesting. He's like a 4-star guy who's got some pop, and he just looks different than the other guys out there. They put him in last week on the right side, 4 catches, 60 yards in the second half. and he's big, he can run, he can muscle. That's a guy that I wish they gotten in earlier in the season, because you wouldn't be having these what if conversations about him. Like, what if you threw him 4 passes a game, right? What would his numbers be like? Not saying he's worthy on your side, but like, that's a guy who's got some talent, and if you invest in it, you're probably going to get rewarded. They finally did that. See what happens there too. So the short stuff probably going to be Winston Wright. When they need a play, watch for Ford Wheaton, slants or something quick. What they do in their screen game and their bubbles and their tunnels and their funnels, I don't know, because they really miss Esdale with that. And quietly, Letty Brown's been kind of normal. I don't think he looked very good last week as far as like his health, his legs, his upper body. Fumbling is unlike him. He put 2 on the ground. And when he's healthy, he can run inside and outside. And they can use him as a weapon in the receiving game too. But just haven't heard a whole lot about him this year because he hasn't been able to do a whole lot. Teams have taken him away. But when he's been good, they've been good. And again, that goes back to the offensive line.
Well, you look at West Virginia's defense last year, so good.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously Tony Fields was a huge pickup for them in the portal. Talk about this defense: Josh Chandler, Semedo,
mm-hmm.
and of course Dante Stills is still there.
Yeah.
Sean Mahone, and then they've got a little bit of a pass rush, or well, you tell us about this West Virginia defense.
Their defensive line is relentless. They're not very big. Their nose is like a 6'3", 275-pound guy. They don't play like a nose like you think about Darius Stills, for example. He wasn't even really a nose, but they kind of have gone to 2 defensive tackles, and one just happens to play in between the end and the other tackle. But they're kind of quick. So Akeem Mesidor is the one to watch. He's got a great engine. He just goes and goes and goes. He tracks plays down. It's a lot of pressures. Quiet last week, didn't play a ton of snaps, but when he's good, he's really kind of whistle to whistle, just going and going. And that's annoying for an offensive line if you're going to see that for 4 quarters, and especially if you're the center. Dante Stills has been great. He's going to make money. He's going to be a pro. He's going to get drafted. He came back to school for that. He's played. His numbers aren't going to say it, but he just does so much for the other guys in the line, for taking plays away. He sets the edge on outside plays. Again, they're really hard to run the ball on the outside unless you're great at it. So he's good at that. Their ends are kind of interesting too. They have Taj Alston, who's like a junior college guy from a couple years ago, who had played three snaps the last 2 years. He'd been hurt, a knee injury once and an offseason Achilles. He just hadn't played. He's been really positive, productive for them. A starter. He comes in. He's played, I forget, something like 450 snaps on the defensive line. He hasn't missed a tackle. It's crazy. But he just is always in the action. He's a good pass rusher. Those three play a bunch. They get sources of snaps or pass rush or TFLs from other guys, smaller parts. No one really of big name status right now. Those are 3 to watch for sure. Linebacker's been their issue. They're beat up there too. One guy got knocked out last week. He was playing more than normal because the starter, and they alternate, but the other guy at that position was injured. I think both of them are probably going to be out. X3 Low and Lance Dixon, which means I don't know what they're going to do with the will linebacker position, except they're going to have to get creative because they've lost some players to transfers, and they just haven't recruited that position with great depth the last couple of years. So I wouldn't be surprised if they play like a 4-1-6 or something like that, because they're going to have to get creative if they don't have those 2 will linebackers. And then I don't know what you do there. Like, you're going to have all these defensive backs in the field. Granted, not trying to tackle Bijan Robinson, so maybe that lines up, but their secondary's been their not their issue. The corners are okay. Through some injuries too. They lost Nick Troy Fortune, starter, out for the regular season at least. But they have another good starter, Daryl Porter, redshirt freshman. He's been pretty good. Really good pedigree. Daryl Porter came from American Heritage, where a lot of good quarterbacks have come from the past few years. His dad's an NFL player. But their safeties have been, I don't know. I'm an A or an F guy, right? It's not bad, would probably be the word. Lots of missed tackles, lots of missed assignments. And it's 2 super seniors, like 2 6-year seniors that came back to play and just haven't been as good. They don't make a ton of plays. They don't get interceptions, force fumbles, recover fumbles, and they're complicit in a lot of mistakes that happen. Those 2 just haven't had great seasons for them. And they were going to have to be great because they lost so much, not only from graduation, like you mentioned, Fields and Darius Stills, but they lost a starting defensive lineman, a starting cornerback, and a starting safety of the transfer portal, right? Their 2 safeties that they brought back were supposed to be better than they were, and that would have alleviated trouble. That hasn't happened, and they've had the roof come off quite a few times this year, and those 2 safeties, one or the other, has been involved more often than not.
That sounds like a carbon copy of what's going on with Texas.
It happens, right?
After losing Chris Brown and Caden Stearns, you
Mhm.
still had B.J. Foster, Brendan Schooler, Jaron Thompson, and that position just hasn't been nearly as productive, I think, as Texas fans thought it was going to be.
School has
Um,
been pretty good the past 3 games, right?
yeah, and God bless him, he had a chance to intercept a
Mm.
pass in overtime that would have ended the game, and it went right through his arms. So, Kansas ends up, scoring the touchdown, getting the 2-point conversion in overtime. But yeah, he has been productive
Mhm.
the last couple games, certainly on the tackle sheet. So I love I love the special teams. Well, I love the kicker, Casey Legg.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't get any better than that, Mike. And he's 16 of 18.
Mhm. Yeah.
I mean, is he the highlight of the special teams for West
Oh,
Virginia?
that and the long snapper probably. They've had issues with everything this year. Just like the stuff that's normally good hasn't been. They haven't had a good punt return in a long time. Their kickoff return was good, but this is against Maryland in the opening game of the season, where all bets are off on special teams in your first game. And again, LIU, Long Island University, in the FCS game. It's been very ordinary and worse since then. And their kickoff return's been bad. Like that would scare me with Jameson back there. That guy's like what 25, 30 yards every return, it seems like. So that would concern me a lot. They don't have anybody who can put it at the end zone. They pick bad times to get momentum and kick it out of bounds. They try to do squib stuff because they don't trust their people. And their plan is so weird, Chip. Like they get to the end of the first half last week, they scratch out a field goal, 17-3, and you're thinking, all right, great. And they do something creative on the kickoff, so they don't give Malik Knowles, Kansas State's returner, they don't give him a chance. Smart. Start the second half. You're kicking off. Don't give Kansas State a chance to rev up their offense. Don't kick it to Knowles. They kick it to Knowles. It's a 65-yard return. They're in business again. March down, get a touchdown. What are we doing, right? They had a punt blocked last game. That would concern me because I think Texas has what four or
Or
five, four, right?
yep.
And like teams have been really close, and I don't know the calls, whatever, but I know what the pictures look like, and the picture doesn't change. And I wonder if teams are just saying, "Wait a minute, if they're going to do this to us, we're going to do this. We're going to take one off the punter's foot." And they did last game. So I would wonder if Texas is going to look at that and say, they keep doing this thing, it just got blocked, or do you expect something different? You'd hope to be something different, but I haven't seen that. We'll see. And Legg's been a great story, and beyond the name and the fact that he's a really good kid, he did not play high school football. His high school did not have a football team, right? He played in a small Catholic school in Charleston, West Virginia, that he played soccer on. So he wasn't like moonlighting with the soccer team or the football team and focusing his time with the other one. He was a soccer player, but had some connections, went to some camps, and has really been like a project that has put himself into it. And they have good coaching and infrastructure here for that stuff. Neil Brown invests a ton in special teams. He's been the best by far, but their punting is erratic. Their coverage teams aren't good, and they just don't get a lot in the return game right now. And it's costing, like the constant field position battles they have to fight because they can't kick it deep, or they can't tackle a kickoff, they can't get a great punt, or they can't pop a return. Those things add up over time, and it becomes so hard for your offensive defense to continually have to deal with that I think that's been a factor lately.
What Texas has lost 5 in a row for the first time since 1956. Um, Everyone's questioning everything in Austin. How do you see this one playing out?
We got some symmetry here, Chip. Do you know what team started that losing streak in 56?
Oh,
West
West
Virginia.
Virginia.
Yeah. So could they
Okay.
end it? Could they end it so many years later? I'm sure that Texas would love to win. I don't think they care who they beat at this point, but I thought that little bit of symmetry was kind of a cool bookend for us.
Good for you
We like
for looking
storylines
that up.
falling in our lap, right? This is easy at this point when it gets hard.
Nice.
You'll know early with West Virginia. You just will. I don't know. Like last time they chose to, this was curious to me, but they chose to take the ball to start the game. And typically teams defer to the second half. They took it because I think they wanted to see if they had an offense. And I don't think they wanted to cover a kick to start the game and start with a head down moment. And that to me says something about how concerned you are about your team. Imagine that. Like you're worried about setting the tone with a special teams play. And that's how this is right now. I think pretty early. And something else too, like when they broke in the middle of the season, 6 down, 6 to go, they never said like, hey, we should make a bowl game. Let's make that our goal. They just broke it down to 6 1-game seasons. And Brown said that like this team isn't good with the big picture. Like the way to go with this team is to take it 1 week at a time. Is it because it's a young team? It's not. It's not a young program anymore either. But there's just some inner constitution, I guess, will be a concern for me. And I think you'll know pretty early. This team wants to go down to Texas and win in the 11th game of the season. It'll be apparent. And if it's a team that's, oh man, that's Texas. Oh man, I remember that guy from that camp. Oh man, these are all 4 and 5 star guys. And they cower a little bit and they play from a defensive position and they're down 7-0 or 10-0. If they give up a big play on offense, if Thompson hits Worthy and all of a sudden it's 7-0, it could be a long day. And then conversely, like if their defensive line is flying around and if they're smashing people by running the ball and even only getting 4 and 5 yards at a time, then they're going to settle in and play. Again, Brown's teams, with rare exceptions, don't get blown out. They play hard, and he's gotten that out of them. And that's what's the response from Texas then, too? Like if West Virginia wants to make it hard, what'll Texas have? I think because the same questions that I ask about the team I cover, you probably have heard asked or have asked yourself about the team that you cover too. Like, what do they have left in this time of the season? I don't know, but I think we'll know pretty early on the West Virginia side.
Yeah, and of course Texas without Bijan Robinson.
And I'm mad about that, man. I really want to see him play.
Yeah, the stuff he was doing through the first half of the season was pretty special. That 216-yard performance on the ground against TCU was something. Well, we got to mention basketball, Mike, because we are in basketball season. How's Huggy Bear's team looking?
Pretty good so far. I don't know if it's a top half of the conference team. It might be, but I don't know that right now. And that's kind of a different story for the past however many years, because Huggins typically has, some veteran players who are proven. And that's not necessarily the case right now. He's got a lot of things that if they go right, it'll be good. And probably more importantly, he has a lot of ways to make it go right. I think it's going to be interesting in that. I mean, not even a year ago, man, they were playing with Oscar Tshiebwe and Derek Culver and playing this really rare two big offense, defense, and we're just adamant about it. Going to make it work. Obviously, Tshiebwe leaves middle of the season, and then West Virginia becomes like a prolific perimeter team. Did not see that coming. But a team that hadn't been able to shoot really started to shoot like crazy last year. And then their top guards or shooters, Sean McNeil, Taz Sherman, they come back. And yeah, Deuce McBride's in the NBA now earlier than expected. Derek Culver didn't come back for his senior year. That was probably a surprise. Smith on a mistake there. And they still have ways to be good. And it's not the same Huggins thumbprint. You think about Huggins and it's like offensive rebounding, pound the ball inside and play like this, non-aesthetic style. And now you see like they're running all sorts of four out offense, and their 5 can come out and make passes or even shoot threes sometimes. So it's a 5 out and you're going, what happened here, right? Is this a new coach? No, it's the same guy and like same staff. He hasn't brought in new blood to give him new ideas, not like a new offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator. And, they got a roster full of 15 players because they had 2 super seniors come back, recruited the full 13. So they got 15 players. So 7 first-time players, transfers from, 1-year FBS programs, which Huggins does not do. I'd be surprised if he brought in 3 transfers period before this. And you guys 3 on the team right now, and they're shot blockers and they're guys who can put their head down and drive, which is what he really needed. He's got shooters. He just didn't have anybody who can guard the rim. His team is always going to rebound. It's not happening. They've been out rebounded by like 30 in the first 2 games. That's pretty bad. But they're going to figure something out, and they have different ways to do it. Like they have depth to guard. They have 2 very good shooters. And they have 3 or 4 bigs that can do something. Everybody's like, oh, what do you do with 15 players? You never play 15. You find 10. 11 maybe, and you do something with it. And that guy's got 902 wins, right? He's going to find a way to do it. He's got a lot of clay right now to work with. I think it's going to be pretty exciting before long.
Yeah, it's interesting. Kansas, Texas, West Virginia, all deep right now to the point where they're, the coaches that are normally, playing with a rotation of 8 or 9 are playing with a rotation of like 11, 12 right now.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be fun. It's going to be fun.
And like there's no way Beard is going to be, 25 points worse than teams most night? No, because he's not going to play that way. He's going to figure something out. I think Huggins is the same way. Like I said, you got a lot of clay. You just got to figure out how to mold it.
Mike, great stuff as always. Appreciate the conversation. Anything else you think is important for fans to think about going into this weekend?
See who else plays quarterback for WVU. I know you guys have had like a bit of an in and out, but not like strategically. They've rotated in their backup quarterback in the third series more often than not. He got brained late in the Oklahoma State game and didn't play last week. They have him for doubtful this week. If he plays, he's like an RPO guy, lots of read options, a runner, Garrett Green, and he can do some things there too. But they have a true freshman, Will Crowder, that I think they're waiting on getting in at some point, and you can tell with Daigie right away sometimes he's not going to have it. And then I don't think that they're going to like let this go spiraling down the drain without trying to stop it. And if they can get somebody else to slip them in, I wonder if they have a lightning in a bottle, one of their backup quarterbacks. Haven't seen the true freshman Crowder at all, but he's played one game, right? So LIU, but haven't seen him do anything of note against anybody good. And they're not talking about him. They're not talking about him, but they're not talking about him. And I wonder if the old, you got some cat ate the canary kind of stuff when you ask about him. If you don't play him now, when do you play him, right? So I wonder if it's a situation where maybe he comes in and just brings the paddles to the offense's chest and gets things going. Or if the backup quarterback's Garrett Green, he can do that too if he's available. But I'm not sure you'll see Daigie wire to wire in this one.
Now, is Crowder similar to Green in that he's a runner?
No. Well, he's more of a runner certainly than Daigie is, but like I would say like your 300-pound offensive lineman is more of a runner than Daigie is too. Daigie just isn't comfortable running, doesn't like to do it. And when he slides, it looks like his legs fell off. He just gets down on accident. But he's got some twitch to him, and he's like a more of a pocket guy than Green. He's maybe in the middle, but to be honest, like we don't know about him. And I think that's what makes it interesting too. He can sling it. He's got good awareness, is what we hear from their intra-squad stuff. He can run a little bit, but is that because he's 18 and he runs a lot? Just because that's what quarterbacks do and they don't know what to do? Don't know. So we'll see. How much can he run? They have a package for him. Have they been able to devote time to that? Can he come in and just run the offense as Daigie would or could not? We'll see. But I just have a feeling that it won't be number 2 from start to finish. Didn't work last week. I don't know why he would try it again.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, Jalen Daniels technically was a backup to Jason Bean and came in and looked like Russell Wilson against Texas last week.
Let's pass the prologue, Chip.
Oh, man. I mean, this is what makes our job interesting, right,
Yeah,
Mike?
like yeah.
Sometimes you have no clue what's coming from week to week, but we sure do appreciate the conversation, the preview of Texas, West Virginia, 11 a.m. on Saturday in Morgantown. Mike, thanks so much, man.
Anytime, Chip. Thank you.
All right. And thanks to everybody for listening in. For Mike Casaza, I am Chip Brown of horns247.com. Until next time, stay safe and keep the faith.